Is this going to, there we are. Okay, so Picking Up with Porpoise is basically cetacean watch volunteering. So what we generally do is go to Bull Bay, which is just a little bit further along from Point Linus, which is a really good spot for cetacean watching. We have an initial sort of briefing, I suppose, and then we head out and just people plonk themselves, as you can see in the background here, and we all just sort of look for whatever we can find, yeah, so it's not just cetaceans. It will be seals, there'll be birds sitting on the water, flying above the water. So there'll be lots of things to talk about. So generally, so and as you can see, there's a bit of a choppy day here, but we've still got a few people. And I think up until now, I'm going to touch wood, we haven't had a Picking It with a Porpoise event that we haven't seen porpoises on. What the problem is that sometimes people are there, lots of people have seen the porpoise, but there's still people who haven't. So I'll get to that later about how to manage that. Okay, so the volunteering part to this is helping to get to know the different species between porpoises and dolphin species, and that comes from learning how to ID, learning about how they differ in behaviour, and also the likelihood of them being in the area helps as well. So it's sort of more or less a view of their ecology. Excuse me. So I will be introducing the various species we could see from the North Wales coast, as will you. So what I'm introducing now is what we do on the day. So I'll go through what exactly we do on the day. I'll also mention what recent sightings there have been, because that's always really handy to know. And we'll talk about the marine code and strandings as well. So this picture on the left is actually a picture of taken immediately from the booklet that we have, that we tend to use and go around to different groups and show people how to do how to tell the difference. So excuse me, my voice is going. So there's lots of information here, but there's also some pictures to point to. So basically, I'll go through now a few of the regular species that we see here and what the difference is between them. So with porpoises, they're resident around here, so there are only resident cetacean, really. They're a lot smaller than bottlenose dolphins. They're only up to maybe 1.5 meters in length. They have a dark colour on the back, and they're actually got quite a pale belly, so they're sort of the two different colours. And usually you'll only see the back surface of the creature moving through the water, and then they'll sort of disappear, and then you might see them surface again, maybe 2 or 3 times, and then they'll disappear for a few minutes. Generally, they definitely don't bow ride. They generally don't breach or hang around in groups larger than 2 to 3. And the dorsal fin is triangular. Now, actually, the only thing that I can tell you that is a direct pointer to ID is this dorsal fin. Everything else is either going to be tricky to see, as you'll see watching, or it's textbook behavior, and they don't always stick to the textbook. So yes, they're smaller than dolphins, but when you're sitting on a cliff, it's very difficult to gauge the size of the animal that you're looking at. They might be dark in colour on the back, but sometimes, as you can see here, this one looks quite grey on the top picture. This one looks a lot darker. When you see them moving in the water, it looks really quite dark. But in relation to bottlenose dolphins, it's difficult to know, but also the light can be different at different times. When the sun's out, they look darker, or lighter or whatever. So it's difficult. Plus, you're not going to see the pale belly because generally they don't breach. But look at this. So there is a porpoise doing what they're named after, which is porpoising. So it's not an unusual behavior, but it's really not regularly seen, them jumping out. And a lot of the time it's the youngsters that are quite sort of lively, and so they'll jump out. So basically all of this, and also, yes, they don't tend to hang around in groups larger than 2 to 3. And that when I say that, I mean together, really closely together. Sometimes when we've been on picnic with the porpoise, you can see them, 7 or 8 in your view, because we're looking at a lot of sea. They tend to sort of be coming in for food. So we gauge the way that we do our picnic with the porpoise. We try and time it with tide, a sort of rising high tide, because that brings particular currents in, which then sort of means lots of good food, and that then attracts porpoises in higher numbers than you usually see them. So because they're residents, the general two or three animals that you'll see, or basically 2, is a mother and calf. They come in slightly closer in to the coast in the summertime to make sure that their calves are well fed and looked after. So finally, the main thing that you're looking for, other than all of these sort of behaviors and stuff, like I said, they're all textbook, is this triangular fin here. So that differs from the sickle shape. This is bottlenose dolphin's sickle shape, or wave shape fin, you can call it. We've been calling it sickle shape, but then one child on a picnic with the porpoise a few years ago said, it looks like a wave. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, how many children actually know what a sickle is? So it's probably better to call it wave shape, but maybe you can still call it sickle shape. So this is bottlenose dolphins. They're not resident in North Wales. They are resident in Cardigan Bay, and the North Wales bottlenose dolphins that we see are the Cardigan Bay bottlenose dolphins coming around the north coast and investigating. So they are regularly seen in areas like Towyn and Criccieth, and sometimes Pwllheli. Less regularly seen around Anglesey on the north coast, but you do see them. And certainly there used to be summer visitors, but you do see them all the way through the year now. They're a lot larger animals. So the bottlenose dolphins in the UK are actually the biggest on the planet. So there are bottlenose dolphins elsewhere in the world, and in comparison to the Mediterranean, the bottlenose dolphins are actually a lot bigger. So in the Mediterranean, maybe they're 2.5 meters. Here they can grow up to 4 meters, and mostly this is because they're living in colder water. So generally animals that live in colder water tend to put on more sort of girth and weight, and yeah, they grow bigger just to cope with the cold. So they're overall grey, so they don't tend to, although this looks a little bit paler, but they don't tend to have a paler belly. They're quite gregarious, so when you see them, a lot of the time they're in bigger groups, but they can be alone. Like I said, they don't stick to the textbook. They regularly are splashing and breaching, and they will bow ride. So like I said, so all of this is very difficult. Again, the size is difficult to know. If there's only one, or even a group of animals, you're not going to notice the size they are unless you've got something in the water that's quite obviously a handy help to gauge the size. The grey, again, these look really quite dark because the sun's behind them, so it's silhouetted. So, and like I said, we do see the occasional single animal, but generally they are hanging around in much more bigger groups. So it's the fin that you're looking for. So don't be too afraid to question the animal that you're looking at. Don't presume it's going to be a porpoise, but I wouldn't say what you're looking at until you've seen the animal 3 or 4 times. So give yourself a little bit of time. Obviously, it's great to point out that you've seen something in the water, but yeah, make sure that you feel confident that you can question whether it's a porpoise or a dolphin. Okay, so those are the differences between porpoise and dolphins. in general and against our most common dolphin, but we do have other dolphins that that come along. So other dolphin species, this is not another dolphin species, but this is also the bucklet as well. So we do have common dolphins coming in. They're much more pelagic, so they live further out to sea generally. They're sleek, they hang around in vast groups. Sometimes you can see them from ferries, but every now and again they do come in closer. And they have, this is the worst picture, we do really need to change it, but they have what's called an hourglass shape patterning on their side, and the top closest to the head patterning is actually quite yellow. That area there close to the head on the just under the dorsal fin is actually quite pale yellow, and the rest is sort of mixes of different colors of gray. So do keep an eye for common dolphins, and you do, but they also will breach and splash around, and they do bow ride. So a lot of the time you will get the chance to see whether they've got this patterning on the side or not. Then there's Risso's dolphin. Now this is a regular visitor here on Anglesey and around Bardsey Island, in sort of from mid-August all the way through to October. So anytime between then, every now and again we get them in April as well visiting. So they do come to the area to feed up, to, you know, on migration or whatever, but they definitely hang around, and they're incredibly splashy. A lot of the time you will see them sort of splashing in the distance. And this animal here that is the example in the picture, this is an older animal, so they are much darker. They're the darkness of their fin initially when they're born and young, and they develop this white scar tissue. Basically, they develop that as they get older. So basically they interact with each other, and obviously that produces scarring, but also their favorite prey is squid, which have beaks, and so that potentially could scar as well. So every time they get scratched, they scar and turn whiter and whiter. So and they don't have, so the other difference between porpoise and dolphins is that porpoises don't have this beak that dolphins have generally. So bottlenose dolphins and common dolphins have a beak. It's called a beak, but basically that nose that sticks out. But Risso's dolphins don't have much of a beak either. They have sort of a sort of slight pointing towards the sort of the edge of their sort of head, but it's not quite a beak. And it's the same for porpoises as well. They don't have a beak. They just have a sort of a rounded head. Orca are classed as other dolphin species because they're actually, in terms of how whales and dolphins are classified, basically orcas are the biggest dolphin. So we do get them regularly, as in, you know, pretty much every year somebody spotted an orca, but it might be just the once in the year or a couple of times in the year. Excuse me. And a lot of the time it is an animal or a couple of animals from the resident West Coast Scottish resident pod. And Jonco is a regular visitor. People recognize Jonco because of the fin shape and the nicking and stuff in the fins. But it's not always Jonco, I don't think, but yeah, so do be aware, and people will. And so orca are also called killer whales, so that's the misnomer. It's not a whale, but yeah, they do kill. So so the orca and the bottlenose dolphins are the two, possibly, well, Risso's as well, but the orca and the bottlenose dolphins are the animals that will put off porpoises from the area. So just be aware, and I'll mention that later. Then the whales, we do minke whales. So there are the smallest baleen whales. So baleen whales are basically the animals that open their mouths and just sort of take in loads of sort of food. So they have lots of, it's called baleen, but basically lots of sort of blubber, sort of, which filters the seafood out. And the smallest one is the minke whale. You can tell it's a minke whale as opposed to any other bigger whale, because the minke whales, because it's so small, the blowhole and the dorsal fin can be seen at the same time. Whereas bigger whales, you tend to see the blowhole first, and then a long time after the dorsal fin appears because they're so big. Obviously, there are other big species to look out for. Seals, they can be incredibly inquisitive, but also I wouldn't presume you're looking at a buoy in the water. I would always, especially if you've got binoculars, just keep an eye, but certainly have a look through the binoculars and see if it could be a seal's head, because they do look very similar and they hang around. So the one thing to mention to members of the public about seeing dolphin species or porpoise species as opposed to anything else is that what you're looking for isn't a regular constant thing sitting in the water. It is a movement in the water and then it's gone. Whereas with seals, some whales as well, they'll log and hang around in the water, so you'll see them and you can point them out and see them a lot. Whereas with porpoise and dolphins, they'll breach, be out, and then back in again. Certainly porpoises, they won't breach, but they'll come, you'll see the movement of the back in the water, and then that's it. Basking shark, again, you can see on the surface, they do bask, and they have got, I think they're called hylgi, in Welsh, which means the sea dog. So they're known for being at the surface, but because they're sharks, they don't need to be at the surface to breathe. So they actually probably could do a lot of their feeding underneath the water. But definitely we have had a basking shark sighting at Pwllheli about a month ago maybe, so it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for. A lot of the time what you'll see if they're on the surface is two fins, and they'll stay again constantly at the surface, and they're pretty big as well. Okay, so the bird species as well, I'm not brilliant with my birds, but we'll see lots of them. There'll be some that you'll only, that sea that you see behind you there looks like there's nothing on it, but probably there's a few patches of floating gulls, maybe ducks as well. So, and you only see those with binoculars. We will have binoculars to sort of hand out on the day. We've only got so many though, so obviously it'll be one per family and first come first serve, but ideally they'll be able to share around and stuff. But we'll also have a telescope to have a look through. So there'll be lots of birds, and one important thing about porpoise and dolphin watching is that a good pointer for finding a fin in the water is actually if you see a sort of a collection of diving birds, because that means there's more food that they're diving to collect food, and if there's food in the water and porpoises around or dolphins around, then they're going to want to be part of it. So it's a really good indication, especially if you're not seeing fins close up but you're seeing birds slightly further out on the horizon. If you can look in the water for a fin, there's a good chance that there will be a fin. A lot of the birds we see are gannets. They're big divers for food. Cormorants, which are slightly what's the word, they don't dive from high, so you're not going to see them quite so much. They don't tend to get involved, I don't think, in the sort of feeding frenzy either that happens when there's lots of food there. And shags the same. And then gulls, terns, and it's important to mention Kemlin. We've got the breeding colony of sandwich terns there, plus also Arctic and common. And Manx shearwater, sometimes you'll see those guillemots flying sort of together on the horizon, or guillemots sitting on the as a floating raft, so to speak. Recent sightings, so on the day I will have a look to find out what's been sighted recently for the day, so, and which is important to mention, just as you're chatting to people, but also we don't always see wildlife much. We have been there, and we've been there, sat there in driving rain. I can't actually believe people stayed with us, but in driving rain, it wasn't too windy, but the rain was definitely coming for us. And people sat there for 2 hours, and it was only the last 10 minutes that we saw the porpoise, so it was worth it, and people stuck with us. But we were chatting with them and sort of making sure that they knew what they were looking for, and telling, telling them, you know, the ecology of the animals and how they like to behave and what's been sighted recently. And, you know, people like to chat about, you know, wildlife they've seen as well, so you can chat about the trust and its work, etc. So, and you know, some of the shore search stuff as well. So but we can't guarantee that there's going to be a porpoise, so but the more eyes there, the better. I mentioned before, we can also say that when orca and bottlenose dolphins have been sighted, definitely it's at a time when we see fewer porpoises. Another problem, especially when we get to some holidays, is that if it's a beautiful day and it's lovely and calm and we're still not seeing porpoises, we're off a lot of the time. It's because there are craft on the water, and we see those. It's really obvious sometimes, or even when you're watching porpoises, they will disappear as a jet ski or a boat comes along. So they aren't necessarily scared off, but they're certainly scared away for a patch, which is, you know, if people are hanging around, we have seen jet skiers just hanging around waiting for them for a good 20 minutes. So that's really quite disturbing. Okay, so the Marine Code, talking about boats on water, there is a marine code all the way around the Welsh coast, pretty much now. It started as, you know, I think it was Ceredigion or Pembrokeshire, and then it basically got copied from there, and now almost all the councils have taken it up. It's a code where any craft that launches, so it's usually like a powered craft, has to launch in certain areas. So the marine code is really obvious there and is handed out, but that it actually, the marine code is being used more to it's been used more now, I suppose, with kayakers and paddleboarders and swimmers, etc., because we can, and actually walkers as well. So it's the disturbance in terms of our marine and bird life, and coastal bird life, is becoming a major problem. So the marine code is sort of being moved less about the craft and more about just behavior in general. It's going to be like a wildlife code, I suppose. There is Wild Seas Wales is a website that's promoting good behavior for all things marine, and it's sort of an amalgamation of lots of organizations, and they're putting videos out and stuff, so we'll be putting stuff out on social media, but so it's worth pointing that out as well. But the marine code, hopefully I've got and this might be the old Anglesey marine code because I've just swiped a picture, but it's also on the website, and hopefully we'll have a few so we can show people good behavior basically when they're out in the water, but also mention, you know, dog walking on beaches, etc. So so basically it's about not spending too much time with wildlife, not getting too close to wildlife, slowing down if you can, not hugging the coast too much, and just being aware of certain wildlife happenings like seal breeding, bird breeding, and try and avoid climbing and walking with dogs off lead in certain areas when they're around and stuff. So just basically respecting our wildlife, and it'll be great if we can start, you know, helping to promote that with Picnic with the Porpoise. We've also got a few little extra what's the word, leaflets and stuff about what to do if you find a stranded animal. I don't know whether we've got lots of these, but there's a website we can point to as well, and we've also got one for what to do if you found a dead stranding, because depending on what it is and how intact it is, it can be autopsy to find out about how it died, which is a really good way to then help promote, you know, better behavior in terms of shipping and pollution, etc. So the advice as well is also on the Wildlife Trust website. So I'll maybe, if I remember, I'll send that to you so you can have a bit of a look, because it's there's lots of information there about what to do if you found a whale stranded, a dolphin, a seal, turtle, etc. So, and who to call. So basically it's the RSPCA, or ideally British Divers Marine Life Rescue. So that's what this leaflet is. It's about how to what to do if you see anything, how to behave, how to help until they arrive as well, which is basically asking people, if you see a seal stranded, a seal pup, or an injured animal stranded on the beach, even if you're not a rescuer, you can help by sort of herding people, because people immediately are interested, and they're not aware that actually getting too close is probably problematic for them, but also for the animal, but also their dogs need to be on leads, etc. So there's lots of advice to be had. And then on the day, so basically we meet at the bay. We used to meet further up, but now there's lots of development in that Bull Bay Hotel, so now we'll meet at the beach. We'll walk up to the cliff area, and that's time for everybody to sort of have a chat and sort of, you know, because it's literally 5 minutes, but some will be slower, obviously, because it's a hill and a slightly unsteady ground and stuff. So we'll just keep an eye on everybody. Then we'll get to the cliff area, I suppose. This is where we get ready to sort of spread out. But before that, I'll ask everybody to sort of be aware that they're on a cliff, be aware of whoever's got the binoculars, if it's a child, for them not to look at the sun, but also please don't look at, don't walk while using the binoculars because they're on a cliff. And everybody just sort of, you know, keep everybody sort of safe and sit down on the cliff and enjoy sea watching. And then I suppose our job then, once everybody's settled, because they go off and find their own way, is to visit each group and make sure each group has been visited, and ask them whether they'd like to know the difference between porpoise and dolphins, or they'd like to know a little bit more about what they're seeing. But the whole time you could be easily totally, you know, trying to tell them what the difference is, and yet there's porpoises there, and that sort of takes over, because that's the whole point of it. But if you can sort of have these conversations as they're watching, then it'll be great, so that everybody goes home knowing the difference between picnic with porpoise, with the porpoises and the dolphins, and then knowing a little bit about conservation and the marine code and what to do and how to behave would be fantastic. So once you've chatted, and feel free to chat, you know, if they're chatting about porpoises and dolphins and stuff, then, you know, feel free to continue conversations. The rest of the groups will be visited, you know, we'll get around everybody. But obviously, as people have sort of taken on board everything that you said, you can sort of say ta-ra and move to the next group and see if they want to know a little bit. So, and on the day as well, what we try and do is keep an eye out for cetaceans. So, and to do that, to do an actual cetacean watch, ideally, because you've got so much sea to look at, you would sort of mark out how much sea you've got, and then sort of halve it and quarter it, and spend 15 minutes in one patch and 15 minutes move on, 15 minutes, just to sort of keep an eye on what you're seeing. So basically you've had a really good scan of each patch of sea. But this isn't a cetacean watch. This is, you know, purely just, you know, a marine awareness event. So we're not actually counting any individuals, but sometimes we do have people doing a full cetacean watch for an hour. While if we've got lots of volunteers, sometimes we could do that and take part in the whale and dolphin watch week, I think it is. So it's also helpful to give them tips and tricks on how to watch as well. People think, oh, well, you're just looking at the sea, but actually, especially when people have come or been advised to bring binoculars, they look through their binoculars at the sea, and actually to see, especially when it's your first, to see a porpoise, especially because it's so small, it's better to use your eyes first. So scan and keep scanning, looking at the sea until you see a movement. Then keep an eye looking at that patch, and then once you see that it is a porpoise, then you can look through your binoculars, because if you look through your binoculars without moving your head, there's a good chance it'll emerge in the same area, because it'll be feeding possibly. Excuse me. A lot of people think they've seen something, and we do as well. It's really easy to think to have a chat and then look out at the sea, and all of a sudden that's when you think you've seen something more than at any other point. And I think it's just your eyes are still adjusting to the wave shape. Sometimes a wave will look like a porpoise back, so give yourself a little bit more time after you've looked to the sea for the first time, just because a lot of things will start looking like porpoises, and also give people a good idea about the sort of what it is they're expecting to see, because like I said, a lot of people will expect these animals to be constantly visible as a presence on the surface, and they're not. These move, they're a sort of a glimpse of an animal rather than anything else. So every now and again we do get them coming so close in, and it's so calm that you can actually hear them puff as well out of their blowhole. So porpoises years and years ago had been called the puffing pig. So sometimes you can hear that when they come out, which is lovely. So if it is calm, get people to sort of listen to see if they can hear it as well. So the challenges on the day are basically what is forecast for Saturday, which is choppy seas, probably quite poor visibility. We won't probably have too many boats and jet skis, but that can be a challenge as well. And like I said, recent sightings of other larger predators in the area. And recent, when I say recent, I don't mean necessarily on the day, but you know, I can suggest that the lack of porpoises seen a couple of days after orca have been seen in the air, because you just don't know where orca are. They could be, you know, further out on the horizon, but it's enough to put a porpoise off possibly. If we don't see creatures on the day, we've still porpoise on the day, or dolphins or whatever, we've still got other things to see. Regularly seals will be seen, but certainly birds, and just sea watching is just a lovely mindful sort of experience, and a lot of people get a lot from just stopping and watching. Kids sometimes need to be entertained, but that's up to their families to do that. They're, you know, everybody's in charge of their own children. And yeah, if you see, you know, a rock pipit or a chuff, then do point that out. They're not sea creatures, but they're definitely wildlife, and it's worth chatting to people about if you see them. So have you got any questions?
No, I think that's quite clear.
It's a bit of a rush through. What I might
Yeah.
do is if this has recorded, don't know how to stop the recording now, but pause.